I want to talk, if it's okay, more broadly about your podcast project, because for anyone following your podcast, which they should, History of England, you've done over 400 episodes. And I calculated, so that's something probably like 300 hours, give or take. And this doesn't even include these additional podcasts. You did podcasts, I think, Eleanor of Aquitaine, you did a spin-off podcast, fascinating figure. You did a History of Scotland in your spare time, a couple of dozen episodes on that. And so I think I calculated I've listened to your voice more than the voice of any other human, except for maybe my wife, and
I'm
my
really
parents.
sorry. Let me
Well, no, but
apologize to your wife.
it's you have a weird kind of celebrity because even if you're, say, a huge fan of David Bowie or Lady Gaga or something, you could listen to all their albums and watch all their movies or whatnot. It still only amounts to maybe 15 or 20 hours of actual human communication. Whereas if you become obsessed with a long form podcast like Mike Duncan or like you, the volume of actual words, I mean, I've heard you say millions and millions of words, but this is the first time you're hearing me speak. Like, do you have people come up to you? Because I get the sense that the people, you're not as famous as Lady Gaga. I'm sorry you had to hear it from me. But
I'm leaving.
the people who do know you have heard more of you than they've heard of Lady Gaga. Like what? And I know you run these History of England tours. Like what happens when you meet your super fans? Like are they is it annoying? Like they just want to babble to you about like the Battle of Naseby for 17 hours or something? Like what what are those interactions like?
Um, uh, Two answers. That one is I don't meet many, to be
Okay.
honest, outside of the tour, which I'll come to in a moment. And it's always tremendous, actually. There's something about podcasting which is oddly intimate. I suppose
Mm,
it's like
yeah.
radio in a way. Um, so it's when you're listening to them, of course, it's intimate because you feel this person
Yeah.
is talking to you, and you feel it, especially a one person, a single person thing. Probably less intimate if you listen to two people because they're talking to each other. And actually, funnily enough, from here in the shed, it is almost as intimate because I've been talking this story for 10 years. And I do feel as though I'm talking to people. And also, I'm thinking to myself constantly, I must be fair to these people.
Mm.
Um, and therefore, I'm thinking about them and I'm thinking about what they're like and what they would want to hear. And I don't want to let them down. I don't want to disappoint them. So it is oddly intimate. Um, so when I meet people, it's great. Actually, I do meet a few, and that's really good. Went to Burford recently with one, which is great. And then on the tour, it's, I mean, it's absurdly enjoyable
Mm.
because I've got a whole bunch of people. We all have a shared interest in stuff. We're talking about history, 24 hours a day, and I cannot do that at home. I'm
Mm.
appalled to say.
Well,
Much as
you
I
can. It just will have ramification.
indeed.
I only picked up your podcast maybe 3 years ago, which is a real pleasure because then I can just binge. I don't have to. Well, unfortunately, now I've caught up, so I do have to wait for episodes. But there was a period that I would take long drives and I'd listen to seven or eight in a row. Especially at night. I go through several decades of early English history. Then things slow down. I think you did something, by my calculation, you did something like 58 episodes around the period of Henry VIII because the historical record becomes so much richer, right? And so there's just more to cover. Because I listened to all this in such a compressed way, it was kind of like watching the evolution of your attitude. And in the first few dozen episodes, you there was almost a desperate quality saying, if you like this, give me a rating on iTunes, email me, come throw a pebble at the window in my house. Like you seemed kind of like you wanted assurance that there was a human out there listening to you.
And generally there wasn't.
Well, but I got this, but it's interesting to listen in retrospect because by the time I was listening to these things, you were quite famous within podcasting circles, at least. But I mean, the historical record is like those podcast episodes still it's you at a time when maybe you weren't even sure if more than a dozen people were listening. Was there a kind of lonely aspect to that?
Yes, it was. I mean, of course, in those days, it was lovely to have started when I started, and I have been incredibly lucky. all of the way through this. Because when I started, it was the Beeb, Mike Duncan.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. You know, the Dan Carlin, of course, as well. Um, and so it was very, we were discovering all this stuff, and it was a hobby anyway, and I never expected anybody would listen apart from maybe my mother,
Hmm.
who actually didn't listen, which
Oh.
is a bit annoying of her. But so, yeah. Oh, she did once. She got stuck.
Don't
And
get
she
me
said,
started on my mother's in journalism, and this is a whole thing. But don't get me started. But
yeah.
anyway, please continue.
Uh, so, um, so yes, there was. It was a very. We were all discovering it, and it was all very new, and you really wanted people to talk to you, and and then of course it changed. Serial came out. It began to grow, and it began to grow for me. I lost my job, which was a tremendous opportunity because that I had a following and was able to then build on that and make a business out of it with the paid for podcasts, all these extra shedcasts. Um, uh, and it really grew, and now it's changed out of all recognition because corporations are coming to
Yeah.
people with names and brands. Everything has changed. So it's so lovely to be there at the beginning. And yes, you really had to ask for feedback because it was a much smaller world. Um, and yes, I suppose I have just professionalized, but I'm still desperate for feedback. I mean, every piece of feedback I get, I read, I love it. Generally speaking, I have found everybody so incredibly positive. I don't have any of this trolling stuff, almost none,
Well, you
because
keep the
basically
politics out of it. You're pretty careful about keeping politics out of it, I think.
I keep politics out of it, and I very specifically don't want to have this is a space which is going to be difficult because we've had um, the English in Ireland. That's
Mhm.
a nasty history.
Yeah.
England does not cover itself in glory in Ireland, never does. Um, and of course, we've got Empire coming off, so it will be much more difficult.
Mhm.
But I got a review. Sorry, I'm blathering on. I got a review the other day on iTunes, which summed it up for me because he said, I like this because he is always talks lovingly. So, promise to myself is that I will be honest about England's history, but I will always be loving about England and the English. That is what
Right.
this podcast is about. And hopefully people would accept that. And generally, they have. I haven't been trolled. If people don't like it, they just stop listening. They don't
Yeah.
send me a horrible email.